Major funding for KPBS Evening Edition has been made possible in part by Bill Howe Family of Companies, providing San Diego with plumbing, heating, and air restoration, flood and remodeling services for over 40 years. Call 1-800-BILL-HOWE or visit billhowe.com. And by the Conrad Prebys Foundation, Darlene Marcos Shiley, and by the following. And by viewers like you. Thank you.
The sun set this evening on the first night of the Jewish Festival of Lights. Thank you for joining us. I'm Maya Trabulsi. Menorahs are being lit at this hour across San Diego County celebrating Hanukkah. This year it's happening in the shadow of the ongoing Israel-Hamas war. And KPBS reporter MG Perez joins us now live from the main plaza in Balboa Park, where a major menorah lighting for peace is underway. MG?
Maya, this is not a protest. In fact, organizers are calling it a peaceful gathering. Those organizers are members of the Jewish Voice for Peace organization here in San Diego. Now, that is an organization that is calling for an immediate ceasefire in the Israel-Hamas war. They're also calling for an end to all the hate crimes that have erupted as a result of that war, half a world away in the Middle East and here at home. This 22-foot, 1,500-pound menorah, made with a thick skin of quarter-inch steel, now hovers over the House of Shabbat, a home away from home and safe space for thousands of Jewish San Diego State students.
I think tearing down any religious symbol becomes personal to me, especially what happened at the murder at Cabana Poway.
Barry Soper is a San Diego author, currently writing a book about the mass shooting at the Chabad Synagogue in Poway during Passover in 2019. Lori Gilbert Kay was killed by a gunman who later pleaded guilty to the hate crime that also injured 3 others. So when Soper saw the vandalism of the menorah at SDSU's Chabad House in late March, he launched the effort to replace it. A security camera caught the suspect, who police later said committed this hate crime.
Pyramids are really hard to climb.
Josh is Soper's son, who happens to be a mechatronic engineer in Florida. The younger Soper has worked on defense weapons and many of the amusement rides at Universal Studios in Orlando. He grew up in San Diego with no connection to SDSU, but he says the anti-Semitic vandalism was personal, and he was compelled to design the replacement.
We thought it was just, replacing a menorah, and then the more we did it, it just started becoming more and more fantastic. And it's, when you see something on paper, it never really represents what the end goal is going to be until you see it.
Like father, like son.
My hope is that whether you're Jewish or Palestinian, life gets better, that we don't get involved in anti-Semitism either way or hate, that we really care about each other and find a happy place for one another.
And that was KPBS's MG Perez reporting. Billions of dollars in U.S. aid to Israel and Ukraine is looking more uncertain than before. Senate Republicans last night blocked an emergency spending bill demanding tougher immigration measures at the southern border. Mike Valerio shows us how the issue is reverberating from Congress to the campaign trail.
As war rages in Ukraine, Gaza, and Israel, battle lines are drawn in Washington over sending aid to U.S. allies.
We can't let Putin win. It's in our overwhelming national interest and the international interest of all our friends.
We're more exposed here at home in the short term than Putin winning in Ukraine.
The central sticking point, Republicans are demanding the security package for Israel and Ukraine also include immigration changes and tougher security measures for the U.S.-Mexico border.
Listen, there's lots of extraneous policy that I want passed as well. I support changes in our gun laws to make sure that we don't have any more mass shootings like we just saw at UNLV. But I'm not demanding that my list of proposals on guns be enacted into law in order to save Europe from Vladimir Putin.
On the GOP presidential primary debate stage, former U.S. ambassador to the United Nations, Nikki Haley, argued the U.S. must continue to deliver aid to key allies as a matter of global security.
The one way that we keep China from going into Taiwan is, one, make sure that we win in Ukraine.
The question now, will an aid package make it out of Congress this year, with lawmakers currently set to adjourn next week? Republican Senator Shelley Moore Capito said Congress will find a way forward to pass the aid bill.
Definitely think it's important, but it's important to tie it with our national security, with 40 policy changes that this administration has acknowledged need to be done.
I'm Mike Valerio reporting.
Well, we do have some pretty active weather, mainly tied to wind over the next couple of days, with the Santa Ana wind event escalating into Friday evening. In the meantime, it's a little breezy out there for some into the mountains. Borrego Springs will drop to 44 tonight, Mount Laguna 41. In town, in the city at least, of San Diego, 49, your expected low. There are some big waves out there, so any cold-blooded surfers, be careful out there with some big waves. But also wind advisories are now in effect for inland portions of the area. We'll have details ahead.
The crisis of fentanyl overdoses in San Diego and around the country continues to take lives. But this morning, San Diego Mayor Todd Gloria said actions he took last year are helping to fight the problem here. KPBS reporter John Carroll has more from our newsroom.
The numbers surrounding fentanyl use and overdoses in San Diego are disturbing. Mayor Todd Gloria says last year, 410 people in the city died from overdosing on the drug, an 800% increase over 5 years. Gloria says the unhoused population has been hit especially hard. It's the #1 cause of death in that group. Gloria says since he issued an executive order last year cracking down on fentanyl, arrests are up 53%. Now, he says there's another problem emerging that's even worse than fentanyl.
I'll also be leading the charge to support Governor Newsom's legislative efforts to increase penalties on Tranq, a Narcan-resistant mix of fentanyl and xylazine that is driving even more deaths.
The CDC says xylazine is an animal sedative that's not approved for use in humans, and they say it's especially dangerous when combined with fentanyl. Gloria says prosecutions for fentanyl-related crimes rose 1,000% between 2018 and 2022. In the newsroom, John Carroll, KPBS News.
A proposed ballot initiative could make it easier to prosecute overdose deaths as homicides. KPBS reporter Katie Hyson looked into the possible effects.
My daughter did not die of what was originally reported as an accidental overdose. My daughter was poisoned.
That's Matthew Capilouto, who's behind the initiative. 4 years ago, his 20-year-old daughter, Alexandra, was home in Temecula on Christmas break. He says she had stopped taking her prescribed medication for depression.
Most people would never know she had these issues because she was very smart. She was a straight A student, had a very high IQ, very quick-witted, and a good sense of humor.
He didn't know she was seeking other ways to self-medicate.
I got a call from my youngest daughter saying, "Dad, get home, Alex is dead."
Capilouto says she bought the painkiller Percocet from a dealer on Snapchat, but the pills were actually fentanyl.
She took half of one before going to bed and never woke up.
The dealer is serving a 9-year sentence. Capilouto says it's not enough. He proposed a law in her name. If someone is convicted of supplying hard drugs like fentanyl or cocaine, they could receive a warning saying
that if they don't stop, and if someone dies as a result of their continued action, they can be charged with murder.
Alexandra's law failed several times to pass through committee at the state legislature. So Capilouto is trying to get it on the ballot to let voters decide. This version also includes a mandatory minimum 10 to 12-year sentence for anyone who provides drugs that result in someone's death.
And I would rather fill our jails than our morgues.
District attorneys can already prosecute these deaths as homicides, but this would make it easier. Capilouto says it mirrors a similar warning given for driving while intoxicated. Jeanette Zenapatin, a lawyer and director of California's Drug Policy Alliance, says the two can't be compared.
We're setting ourselves with a slippery slope.
She says the proposal doesn't meet the legal standard for homicide of intent. Suppliers and users often don't know exactly what's in their drugs.
The best way to actually have knowledge and understand what is in the dose is to allow for more drug checking.
On a late November day in El Cajon, Jess Cochran helps load San Diego's harm reduction RV with portable testing strips.
As somebody with a pretty extensive lived history with substance use, I got really tired of watching my friends die from lack of resources.
She's from Indiana, where supplying drugs that result in death is punishable with up to 40 years in prison. She says when neighborhood drug dealers are incarcerated, overdoses increase. It doesn't reduce the supply, but it does make it more dangerous. People aren't familiar with the new dealers or what they're selling. Cochran says harsher penalties also make users less likely to call for help when someone they're with overdoses.
We're seeing even minors being charged, right? And these are kids that like got a Xanax bar and they gave it to a friend and they didn't know that it had fentanyl in it. And how are they supposed to? Right? Like, they're not superheroes. They can't, like, look at something and tell you what the molecular structure of it is.
The RV pulls up behind a breakfast diner where more than a dozen people gather around tents and cars.
What's your name?
Led by Tara Stamos-Bisig, the team hands out kits with everything from hand sanitizer and beanies to Narcan and pipes. Some used right in front of the RV, slumping to the ground. The team isn't fazed. They're focused not on ending drug use, but on making it safer.
Straight pipes, she probably needs wound care, hygiene, all of it.
The clean needles and fentanyl test strips they hand out save lives for pennies each. Team member Jordan Parness operates a drug testing machine in the back of the RV. He's put about 600 samples through it since September. He says if opioids are not from a pharmacy, they almost certainly contain fentanyl. I asked him to estimate how much it costs to run the harm reduction street outreach.
More than incarcerating one person for a year and less than incarcerating two people for a year.
Under about $200,000. Though white and black people use and supply drugs at similar rates, black people are far more likely to be incarcerated for it. Under the decades-long war on drugs, overdose deaths have continued to climb. Stamos-Bisig points to the 111,000 deaths each year.
We are having the equivalent of a 747 crashing every day in the United States of people overdosing.
She says she and initiative proponent Matthew Capelouto have the same goal. She just doesn't think his approach will work.
People aren't getting a solution in prison. They're not getting treated in prison. They're not, that's not balancing any scale. This takes away from the number of deaths.
Californians may see Capelouto's initiative on clipboards for their signatures. Capelouto says Congressman Darrell Issa plans to announce a federal version of the legislation on Friday. Katie Hyson, KPBS News.
I'm Amna Nawaz. Tonight on the NewsHour, Liz Cheney on her new book, January 6th, and her warning to the American public. That's coming up at 7 after Evening Edition on KPBS.
The U.S. military is grounding all of its Osprey aircrafts following a crash in Japan that killed 8 service members. Early reports indicate a possible material failure and not human error. In August, 3 Marines were killed in an Osprey crash during a training exercise in Australia. And last year, 5 Marines died in a crash during a training flight in the Imperial County. Jim Kidrick, a former Navy pilot and CEO of the San Diego Air and Space Museum, says although the previous crashes are not necessarily related, the grounding is important to find out more information about the crash in Japan.
They're not saying that there's any correlation to what's happened before. That would be very, very premature because the investigation is not complete.
The Air Force, Navy, and Marines used these aircrafts. The military did not specify how long the Osprey would be grounded, but did say it was all out of an abundance of caution. Military veterans and families gathered this morning on the flight deck of the USS Midway Museum for Pearl Harbor Remembrance Day. KPBS military and veterans reporter Andrew Dyer was there for the ceremony.
Here is the actual bombing of the mighty USS Arizona.
It was 82 years ago on the island of Oahu that a sleepy Sunday morning turned into a day that lives in infamy. The surprise attack plunged the U.S. into World War II and changed the course of the 20th century. In San Diego, the day is marked every year with a ceremony on the flight deck of the USS Midway Museum, a ship itself named for a battle in the war that followed the attack. Museum Marketing Director David Kuntz says time hasn't diminished the day's importance.
We had over 300 people here today, but I think what was even more gratifying for me was the fact that I had some people here that are in their 70s, 80s, and a few 90-year-olds, but I also looked out and I saw some very young people. I saw some 20-year-olds out here.
Photos of Pearl Harbor survivors featured in the ceremony. They included 2 local survivors and Dory Miller, who became the first black man awarded the Navy Cross for his actions that day, and for whom an aircraft carrier is to be named. Miller was killed in the war. The San Diego survivors, Stu Headley and Clayton Schenkelberg, both died in 2021. While some of their families attended, this was the 3rd year in which no survivors made the ceremony.
I think it is really difficult to finally come to realization that those who survived Pearl Harbor aren't going to last forever. And it's been over 8 decades, which means the youngest Pearl Harbor survivors today are probably 99 years old.
The ceremony closed with ringing bells, a wreath laying, and a vintage aircraft missing man flyover. Andrew Dyer, KPBS News.
The Oceanside City Council has rejected a proposal to create a new policy for flags on city flagpoles. 2 city council members had asked for the policy to limit flag displays to government flags and some specific commemorative ones. Their proposal stemmed from a request to fly a Sanctity of Human Life flag at the Civic Center, but LGBTQ+ activists were concerned any policy would ban pride flags, which the city has never flown. Last night's vote leaves the current practice in place. Community members can ask to display special flags, but the council does not have to say yes. Minimum wage workers in California can look forward to a pay bump at the start of the new year. The minimum hourly wage will rise by 50 cents to $16 an hour, and that will be the 2nd highest rate in the country, next to Washington State's $16.28. New York City is also raising its minimum wage to $16. 20 states are still using the federal minimum wage of $7.25, which hasn't gone up since the year 2009. With the holidays around the corner, many families are setting up their Christmas trees. KPBS North County reporter Alexander Wynn shows us a sustainable option in Ramona.
Amid the hills of Ramona sits a small Christmas tree farm.
Look at this, is a nice tree, Ian.
Ramona resident Shasta Levine came to Highland Valley Christmas Tree Farm with her son Ian Miller to pick out a small tree for their apartment.
Just wanted to have it just feel country, like it came from the earth instead of just your big lots where they're already pre-cut. So it just seemed like a nice little activity to do after school.
Highland Valley is one of the few places in San Diego where people can come to pick out their tree, have it cut down, and take it home.
Timber.
Alessandro Galloni and his family took over the Christmas tree farm in 2006. He says he gets customers who've been coming here for multiple generations.
When we purchased the property, we had the mindset of making wine, and we've done that. In those first years, there was a lot of customers that came to us saying, hey, we've been coming here for years, generations. I grew up coming out this farm, and please don't get rid of the Christmas trees. It's part of our tradition.
Galloni says his family keeps the tree farm going for those customers. Tradition is what led Poway resident Ted Anderson to this 2-acre tree farm. He wanted to pick out and cut down his own tree, something he hasn't done since he was a teenager living in Colorado. At $20 per foot, Anderson says it's cheaper too.
That was part of the reason that pushed me in this direction. We can get a taller tree for a little less price. I'm looking for a 10 to 12 foot tree, and this seemed very reasonable up this way.
With inflation and shortages caused by climate change, Christmas tree prices have gone up. It takes a sapling about 5 to 6 years to reach about this height, ready to be harvested. Galloni is already starting to see the effect of a warming climate on his trees.
The needle tips will start going a bit more orangey with the heat, so they'll get burned. But also there's a little worm that'll get into the tree tips, and it'll affect them a lot more.
But buying a live tree from a local farm is still a sustainable way to enjoy the holidays.
But the ones that are here, they're in the ground, they're growing, they're adding to our local air quality.
In Ramona, Alexander Wynn, KPBS News.
A study reveals why California redwoods are so resilient following damaging wildfires. Researchers looked at the trees in Big Basin State Park south of San Francisco following the CZU lightning complex fires of 2020. They found carbon reserves dating back 50 to 100 years that can be used to create new leaves and perform photosynthesis. They also found new sprouts coming from bud traces, which are lines that run from inside the tree to the surface that can lead to new leaves.
The trees actually, they were able to survive it and they're able to recover. They're not going to look the same as they did in the past, and it's going to be a while. As to whether or not they'll survive, it seems like they're doing okay, but perhaps they'll be more sensitive to things like drought or definitely a repeat fire. And so those are the types of things that we would hope to avoid for them.
Some of the trees grew the bud traces thousands of years ago in biological anticipation of an event like wildfires.
Our weather headlines do feature some relatively big, high-impact headlines involving wind and some rough surf as well, but wind is the main concern. Anybody out there who might be into surfing probably loves the big waves, but be careful. There are some extra dangers out there. But the Santa Ana winds will be escalating into Friday evening and into Friday night. There will be some inherent fire danger tied to that. It is a dry, downsloping wind with very low humidity whenever the Santa Ana winds present themselves. And the storm track is going to stay to our north, so we don't expect to see any real rain in the next 7 days. Tonight we'll get down to 49 in San Diego and across the metro with a partly cloudy sky. And then the winds will begin to pick up starting in the afternoon, especially on Friday. Friday's high around 69 into Escondido and into Oceanside 68, 66 in San Diego, El Cajon 70 degrees. And here's the contrast from the valley and the desert. Say the Borrego Springs are around 71, but Mount Laguna 49 up there in the mountains. So we are looking at wind advisories for inland portions of San Diego County. You can look north up into the area around Los Angeles. High wind warnings in effect for some. And there are also some rough waves and rough surf. So that's the reason for that beach hazards statement. So any surfers that often jump on the opportunity to take advantage of these big waves, just be especially careful. There are some true dangers out there. The winds will be offshore Friday night through Saturday. It's a Santa Ana wind event. We could see gusts of 40 to 60 miles per hour, and just the inherent dry, downsloping nature to these winds do boost the fire risk with also some travel dangers for crosswinds and so forth. High-profile vehicles, be careful. It'll be very gusty through the canyons and passes. So here we get into the coastal forecast. And again, beyond the wind issues, Friday night, it's a generally nice weekend. We warm up to 74 Saturday. That downsloping wind does boost our temperatures up. Inland areas, 78 Sunday. Very nice sunny weather after the wind subsides. Into the mountains we go, and here we're going to rise up into the low 50s after spending some time in the 40s for highs. And the deserts are going to be a little cool here. Mid-60s Saturday, 68 Sunday, warming back up to 71 on a pleasant Monday. I'm AccuWeather meteorologist Jeff Cornish for KPBS News.
Some disappointing news. Disappointing but not surprising news for Friars fans. Superstar slugger Juan Soto is headed to New York. The Padres are shipping the three-time All-Star along with center fielder Trent Grisham to the East Coast in a 7-player trade with the Yankees. In 2022, the Padres made a blockbuster trade to get Soto, but he's set to be a free agent by the end of next year. And it had become clear the Padres couldn't resign him. In exchange for Soto, the Padres are getting back 4 young pitchers and a veteran catcher. Giving makes you feel good, and it's backed by science. Studies show donating may have positive health effects, including reducing blood pressure and improving heart health. But in certain charity-seeking situations, some may feel a different type of pressure. Gloria Pazmino explains.
It's the season for giving gifts and giving back.
Would you like to give $1 to this particular organization?
It's known as Checkout Charity, rounding up your purchase or tacking on a few extra dollars to a charity of the retailer's choosing. But many Americans don't feel gleeful while giving.
We are feeling the sense of guilt or shame if we don't donate this time of year.
And that means that people are begrudgingly giving money at the register.
Social pressure can be a major driving force when donating at the retail counter. And Ohio University researchers say this can induce anxiety.
At the point of checkout, there are some real consequences that happen for customers. Specifically anxiety and maybe them feeling like a bad person if they're not giving.
While customers may temporarily feel uneasy, the extra pennies do add up. Grocery chain Albertsons raised over $43 million for hunger relief at registers in 2022, according to Engage for Good. But financial experts agree a polite no is okay.
Know what you care about, know who you support, and then even say, you know, I support the environment, and this particular cause is less pertinent to me.
And if you don't have cold hard cash to donate, there are more ways to give back.
You could look into volunteer opportunities. A lot of people volunteer around the holidays, but those needs for volunteers exist all year round.
In New York, I'm Gloria Pasmino.
And here's a look at what we are working on for tomorrow. In the KPBS newsroom, the war between Israel and Hamas has many Jews unsure how to celebrate Hanukkah this year. On NPR's Morning Edition, how some younger folks in Los Angeles say they're focusing on hope and hospitality in dark times. And on KPBS Roundtable, we're highlighting some of our latest investigative reporting, as well as next year's power forecast for gas and electric customers. And be sure to get the latest from KPBS News delivered right into your inbox. Breaking news, arts, and our top headlines are all available as newsletters. And you can find tonight's stories right on our website, kpbs.org. Thanks for joining us. I'm Maya Trabulsi. Have a great evening.
Major funding for KPBS Evening Edition has been made possible in part by Bill Howe Family of Companies, providing San Diego with plumbing, heating, and air restoration, flood and remodeling services for over 40 years. Call 1-800-BILL-HOWE or visit billhowe.com. And by the Conrad Prebys Foundation, Darlene Marco Shiley, and by the following. And by viewers like you. Thank you.